by acknowledging the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been a traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississauga of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And it's my pleasure today to introduce, and you won't be able to see her on Zoom, Mary Chipman, to introduce our speaker. Mary Chipman to introduce our speaker.
Yes, I'm going to stand where the light is.
Just a minute, I'm bringing you the mic.
I'm going to stand where the light is, not where the camera is. I need to have some notes I would like to read. It is a real pleasure to introduce my friend and former colleague, Shah, to you this morning. We met 50 years ago as new faculty members in the new Department of Preventive Medicine at this university's medical school. Shah had come from Vancouver. He had qualified as a pediatrician, so in Toronto, he also was working at the hospital for children. Some of his pediatric colleagues provided care in the Aboriginal community in Sulawesi, and Shah joined that program. There he met the challenges and opportunities present in that community. Throughout his career as a doctor and as a public health practitioner, Shah has been a strong and effective advocate for poor and marginalized groups in our community, especially, but not only, those from First Nations. Although retired from the university since 2001, Shah has remained very active as a practicing physician until 5 years ago, and as a consultant board member of the Anishnawbe Health Foundation and a member of the Disability Education Working Group. Shah's accomplishments have been widely recognized. Some of the highlights include the Eagle Feather, which is the highest award available for the Indigenous community for a non-Indigenous person. The University of Toronto gave him an honorary Doctor of Science degree a couple of years ago. He received Queen Elizabeth Silver Jubilee Medal in 2011. Other awards have come from a wide variety of agencies: the Gujarat Public Affairs Council, the Association of Ontario Health Service Centres, the Ontario New Democratic Party has given as examples, and he received the Order of Ontario in 2005. Now, it's also a pleasure to introduce Shah's colleague, Diane Gray. Diane is a member of the Mohawk Anishnawbe community. He is past chair and member of the board of the Anishnawbe Health Foundation. He's a graduate of the Indigenous Studies program at Trent University and has a long career of impressive variety, from real estate and property management, clothing design, and a school of martial arts. At present, she's president of a company dedicated to providing efficient and environmentally safe ways to recycle agricultural waste into building materials that are green, high quality, and sustainable. So I ask you now to welcome Shah and Diane Gray.
Thank you for the question period. Okay, there you go.
Thank you, Mary, for that introduction. And thank you, my colleagues. Some of them were with me all during that period. So may not be something new to you as well, or might refresh your memory as well. Before I start, I thought that I have to thank a few people, because without their help, I don't think I would have been where I am. And one of them was Mary Chipman. She was my always like Len Enders. I can go to her for advice. I can go for, English is my second language. And if I had very important letters or some documents or so forth, I would always make sure that it goes through the Mary's eye, because I didn't understood nuances of language at times. Okay, and Mary was always there till last year for me. Okay, so we've been that wonderful 50 years, and thank you, Mary. The other person I wanted to is Dr. Mary Jane Ashley, and she's a member of this group as well. And she was my chairman for 11 years. And I really is grateful to her because as a chair, she allowed all the crazy things I come out with ideas and so forth, and never question really. She understood really concept of health promotion, and she realized that what I was doing was health promotion. The third person here is a Dr. Mary Jo Kellner, and I always went to her as well for advice in academic areas or when I was very frustrated with something or so forth. She always was calm, cool, collective, and gave me wonderful kind of advice and also calm me down, really, basically. So thank you. And the fourth one is Dr. Cornelia Baines, and I think she's also a member of this group. And Corey was my editor. English being my second language, she would my editor on my first 2 or 3 editions of my textbook. And she would reduce my whole paragraph in one sentence. Okay. And she expected me to be upset. And to her surprise, I was never upset because I knew what she was doing. She was making my baby better. So I thanked her as well. And finally, I just want to thank all the colleagues at the U of T really in different faculties because they really helped me. While I came out with ideas, you needed army to carry out some of this stuff. And the Faculty of Arts and Science, medicine, dentistry, social work, nursing, I tell you, and also students in those faculties were all behind me. And without them, I don't think I could have made what I tried to do really in my life. So I thought that this was a good public occasion. I'm at what I call jokingly, I'm in departure lounge now, and I better this. And I'm not going to get a second chance, probably. Every place I go, I say, this is the last time I'm here. So anyhow, so let's move on what I want to say. And as you can see the title, it's about the journey. And my journey within the Indigenous community. And I didn't know the word reconciliation at that point in time. I did not know what ally meant or so forth. Only thing I understood was if it's a good thing to do, don't wait for others to do. You move on, because if you wait for other people to do, thing doesn't happen necessarily what you want to get done. Now, how do we move this slide?
Use.
Just here?
That should do it.
No, it doesn't do it.
That should do it. That should do it. That
No.
should do it.
Just
Okay.
let me go this way, otherwise, okay, I'll do it this way. Now it's okay, I can do it.
Okay.
Okay, now in this journey of mine, just a minute, I think we moved too fast. Oh my God,
You're
okay,
going
I'm
back.
going that way. I wanted to go, yeah. No, that's okay, sorry. Okay, that's fine. Okay, sorry. Justice Sinclair really aptly said that this journey is not only the road, which is at times difficult, because the people with whom we are working may not be ready at that point in time. Also, it's a long journey, and it's never-ending journey, because still what damages we have done for last 400 years or so, ain't going to be reconciled in a short time. So you have to be ready and prepared for not only the rough road going through that, but also it's going to be a long, long journey, and you have to be prepared for it. Okay, outline of my talk really. So that's what I was going to talk about is some of my own background and how I got into the Indigenous health, and what lessons I learned and what helped me to move forward really. And then in part two, I'm going to give some examples which were quite interesting for me to learn as well during that process, but also had some impact towards the reconciliation, and some concluding remarks then. Okay. Now, I came to Canada in 1965 as an intern. I'm a physician, I'm a pediatrician as well. And I came in 1965 to Vancouver. And I got, after my internship, I got involved into a lot of research in pediatric, mainly in healthcare area. And I had absolutely no clue. In those days, I took my citizenship in 1970, being a British Commonwealth citizen. I didn't have to take exam in those days. Nowadays, you have to take the exams, but in those days, you didn't have to take the exam. All you took the vow, and that's it. So I had no knowledge of Indigenous people at all. Only knowledge, I was very grateful to my friend, late Dr. Robinson. He was my mentor with whom I learned a lot of things. And every time when he had to give me a gift, he would give me the gift of a book, initially on Indigenous people. And the first one I still remember was The Guest Never Leaves Hungry. And this was done, autobiography of one of the chief in British Columbia, beautifully done and so forth. When I was living in Vancouver, coming to Toronto in 1972, he gave me the gift of silver cufflinks. And cufflinks had a Haida design. I still have those ones. And all Dr. Robinson was doing, he was involved himself in Indigenous health, but with me, we were doing different kinds of research. But he was putting the seeds in me. I never realized till later on, really. And then I come to Toronto. And in Toronto, I was back around 74. I came in 72, and in 74 or so forth, I realized that there was a program at the Hospital for Sick Children called the Sioux Lookout Program. And this was in this whole area of northern Ontario here. That's Hudson Bay and this Manitoba border and so forth. And there's thousands of kilometers, all barren land in that sense. And a lot of studied with lakes down there. And there were about 26 Indigenous community were living there. And the average population was somewhere between, not the average, but the population range in 250 people to 1,600 in those days, the highest number. And the chief of the Hospital for Sick Children, that late Dr. Harry Bain, he was visiting at somewhere about 65, 66, that area for fishing. He was an avid fisher. He was from North Bay, so he was an avid fisher. He used to go there, and he saw the sorry state of healthcare and the health status of the Indigenous people in those areas, which was almost non-existent healthcare really. So he kind of talked to the feds and say, listen, we will provide you some medical personnel in terms of consultant, and let's start a program. And so initially with the medical people, and then he introduced physio, OT, radiology technicians, and all kinds of people in those days, and medical and surgical specialists. And so I kind of found out that I said it would be interesting to go there. Okay, so I went, honestly, as a curiosity seeker, oh my gosh, it's moving on its own. Anyhow, that's good. Oh, yeah. Okay, and those communities were only accessible. I don't know why it's moving.
I think you must be touching something, but
Oh, sorry.
well, don't be sorry. Sorry, it's being so difficult. There we go. Okay.
Oh, it's moving, see? Okay, now it's okay. Sorry.
It's weird.
It is weird, isn't it? That's okay. Technology.
Charlie, come up here and fix it. It's
Technology.
my computer. These buttons aren't working. Oh, now they are. All right.
Okay.
Okay. I'll just stand here.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Okay, that's moving your slides now.
Oh, that's up and down is moving slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, sorry. And those communities were very isolated, very remote, and there was no roads in most of them, almost except one community, and accessible by the plane. In those days also, rather than a couple large reserves, Sandy Lake and Big Trout Lake, there was you had to fly by this little plane there. Going and every time, interesting, I went out of my home, I would make sure that my wheel was ready, and my wife knew all my whatever needed to be done and so forth. So it was not that simple, you know. In winter we got on skis, and in summer we landed in the water, because all the First Nation communities were on the lake that time, all the time anyhow. And what did I find there by going? Initially I used to go once a year for 1 week, and then become 2 and become 3 times as I got more and more involved with them. And what did I find there? And that was a kind of eye-opener to me. What I found was that the housing needed all major repair. There were overcrowded housing leading to infectious diseases and so forth. The stores, particularly there will be always one store, and there will be cooperative run by the band, and the prices were exuberant. The loaf of bread in those days, I know in Toronto, we used to get somewhere about 50 cents or so forth, and it was $2 there. Okay, and everything had to be flown from south, and all and so things were quite I think I went to school as well, and the school where also there were itinerant teachers like me going and coming back. They didn't know much about the culture. So it's the nursing station we had. Only one nurse or 2 nurses would be there, and they had no clue about Indigenous people at all. And and communication. What was happening, that there were so many itinerant people like me going back and forth, that to get the trust relationship, particularly when you're providing health services and so forth, a lot of it depends on trust. And that trust, you know, I tell you, first time I went there and I said, I had a woman and she came with headache. And I said, where does it hurt? And she said, I don't know. I said, how long has it been down? I don't know. And I was frustrated. And I turned around my chair towards the wall, and I say to myself, I say to my client and say, I can't help you if you can't talk, if you can't give me the history. And then I had to do introspection. And I said, why should she trust me? I'm there fly by night. Okay, why would she trust me and open up and give me things what I needed to be and so forth? So this was the kind of situation on those. Only thing, most of the, fortunately or unfortunately, whatever way you think about it, all those First Nation community had, depending upon the size of the community, minimum 1 church and somewhere about 3 to 4 churches there. Okay, so they all wanted to salvage their soul. Excuse my expression, but that's how I felt, and a lot of thing to say about that, but I won't now. So that was my introduction to. Then I also, just a minute now, move. You say up and down.
Well, that was worked a moment ago. Yep. Whoops, that's going backwards. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
So this is advanced now.
Yeah. Okay. The next thing also, I was very fortunate in to get to the Arctic Circle, all around the whole from Yukon to all the way Nunavut, and I was in Hojo Heaven, which is about 150 kilometers south of North Pole. This was in May, was minus 35 degree. However, the sun was almost 24 hours there, and I was sleeping in my quarters there, and suddenly I heard a lot of noise at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I went and looked in the window, and kids were playing there, 4 to age 15. They were all playing down at 2 a.m. And I couldn't believe that. And then so next morning I asked my host what was going on, why the kids were not in bed. And they say, sir, there is a housing shortage here quite a bit. So parents sleep at night and the kids sleeps during the daytime. And the situation, if you read recent report of the Stats Canada on Indigenous people, housing is the worst one in Inuit communities till today. Okay, and so it's worth reading. Nice synopses out there on the for Stats Canada on Indigenous population, the census 2021, by the way. It's a good one anyhow. Okay, so then also, I don't know how it moved again on its own. I didn't touch. I promise I didn't touch. That's okay. That's good.
Up to have a timer.
Oh, I see. Might be the timer. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Well, we'll get back. I'll get back.
These arrows are going forward and backwards.
Yeah, okay. The other thing, I was also as a fellow, WHO, World Health Organization fellow, twice, and I had the privilege of visiting the lot of Indigenous community in the USA, particularly in Arizona and New Mexico. And also I went to study with in Australia, the Aborigines, and in Newfoundland, the Maori people. And that gave me very interesting insight, because what happened, the situations were similar. And they realized that colonizer was the same. Okay, and was the crown, British crown everywhere there. And they had a policy back in 1457. Parliament had a department, British government had a department called Department of Indigenous. Okay, and what the government wanted is, excuse my expression, the physical resources, or root, I call it. And the church was in cahoot with them too. And church wanted the soul. So they had a perfect combination. And the policies were similar, almost all wherever they, even in India and China and so forth. However, the most difference is the time when they were colonized and whether they had a written language or not. The impact of people who had a written language had lesser impact of colonization. And if you had a lot of population density like India and China and so forth, was a lesser, relatively, but it was that. And people like First Nations and Inuit people and people in Africa even, and Australia and so forth, and USA and South America, the impact was much larger because they didn't have written languages. Because if you have written languages, next morning you can get up, or in the middle of night when the colonizer was not looking, you can open up Bhagavad Gita or whatever you want, have your scripture, and say, this is what we are supposed to do. Whatever he or she thinks, this is what we are supposed to do. So you were able to retain your culture, language, traditions, and all kinds of things and so forth. So that was a very interesting thing. And finally, I had also, about 8 years, that's okay, don't worry, it's okay. Back in about 2013 or so forth, I was also got involved into the prison system, because my work with the Aboriginal children at the Anishnawbe Health in Toronto, kind of, and with the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, we used to have an assessment team and so forth, and I was the coordinator of the assessment team. And what revealed to me that there were a lot of teenagers who had a poor executive function. And they used to get in law with the law, and they were in detention homes and so forth. And so I realized that and when you look at the stats, prison population, 30%, 30 to 33% federal prison population is indigenous people. And so I realized that there were a lot of people who were never diagnosed. So we kind of assembled the team and say, if they were, and we wanted to assess them, particularly when they were on remand, because they've been judged, but not still sentenced. And so we went in the prison system, and I can tell you at the age of 78, Dr. Shah was in prison, every prison in GTA, also in Hamilton and Milton penitentiary. And it was quite an experience too there as well. So with all these things, that kind of formed me who I am. Okay. And my work at the Anishnawbe Health, when I retired at 2001,
Just keep going.
when I retired in 2001, within 2 weeks, I got called from the executive director who knew me well of my work, and said, we would like to invite you to work with us because we are looking for somebody like you. And I was flattered, I have to come out and say, but it was just 2 weeks in retirement. And I said, no, I'm not coming. I just retired. I was working on my 5th edition of my book and so forth. And it kept coming back and so forth. And so I said, okay, I'll come only part-time. And then part-time ended up being full-time. And I still retired a couple of times. And they had my retirement party and I got called back again. And so then I worked till 1980 because people thought when I got retired, I was given a nice blanket. And people thought that Dr. Shah is collecting the blankets. That's why he's retiring. Anyhow, so that this whole thing gave me, and I kind of always questioned myself. And also, I coming from India, in first 25 years of my life, we were under the British Raj till 1947, and then got it and so forth. So I had some concept of colonization, some concept, never thought of that as a colonization. And I also, being a Jain faith, which is one of the very small faith in India, and this faith believes much more in forgiveness and also connected with ecosystem. And so that also helped me what I did in my life as a individual and so forth. So that's what, having that background, you understand where I come from. And back in I'm going to go on this one now to give you some examples what I did. In 1988, I and my wife and my 2 sons who were teenagers at the time, we went to Europe, took a trip all over the place, and the 3 of us had a Canadian citizenship. But my wife was holding back. First generation immigrants, particularly women, always holds back because they don't know if their husband, something happens to them, they might go back. Okay, and that's what my wife was too. But she realized that she had to have a lot of visa taken compared to me and my 3 children. Because as a Canadian, you had you didn't need a visa in many countries, whereas the others she needed a visa and so forth. So when we came back, she says, now I'm going to be a Canadian citizen. So she had to take the exam. Now the exam had come in. Okay, and I saw a couple of booklets always lying in my house. So I kind of, out of curiosity, looked at the booklet and said, and what did I find? There were 2 booklets. One was about our parliamentary system. And the second one was not a really booklet, it was a glossy 2x2 glossy thing. One side was topography of map of Canada, which I still till today, I don't understand what topography map was doing at the back of the thing. However, in the front of the map, there was a border, and the border had a prime minister. Just a minute, let me go down. Okay, no, sorry. it started, it moves when you do this. No, still, I wanted that one. Okay. Okay. And on the border, John Mackenzie and Parliament Building and the Indigenous person with canoe and all kinds of things were on the border. But inside, this was written. 3 sentences about Indigenous people for new Canadians who are going to be here citizen. And when you read it, when you see that, I was kind of flabbergasted. And I always jokingly say, I put my last sentence after these sentences, and we lived happily ever after that. Okay, so that's when and that kind of spurred me. And then I started realizing that we got to do something, because Canadian population, 16% of Canadian population all throughout through Confederation 1867 till today, is they were born in different lands. So they were, as a first generation, become 16%. It goes up 20% from time to time, but by and large, it's 16%, 1 in 6 Canadian. Okay, and if that's all they know about Canada, and particularly our relationship with Indigenous population, I said that's not acceptable. So the next thing I did is I started writing a letter to the Minister of Health, Minister of Citizenship, Prime Minister, other ministers, relevant ministers. I wrote also letters to the leader of oppositions, a lot of heads of the church organization, because I know they have a heart and soul. So I wrote to them, I wrote to Social Planning Council, I wrote to the municipal government, and saying that we need a change in this citizenship guide. And it should include a lot more. And it should include a lot more, and it should be done in consultation with Aboriginal people. What needs to go there? Okay, and it lasted 2 years, my letter writing campaign, and I told them that if these people felt strong about this organization, they should send a letter to the Minister of Citizenship. And many did. Not everybody did, but many did. And even Toronto City Council passed a resolution as a City Council resolution on their council, and they sent their support as well. So what happened that finally in 1994 they changed the citizenship guide. Also, one of the things I wanted on citizenship guide is that they should be, the new Canadian should be examined. There are also examination questions. And as a professor, all of us knew that it's the tail wags the dog. Okay, people don't study unless it's an exam. Simple as that, we are human beings. So that's what by and large happened. By and large, I'm not saying everybody, but 90% of the students will not. So I wanted to make it that it is also on citizen. I also connected with the citizenship judge before, and this was the judge Rosella Abella, and she ended up being a Supreme Court justice, but she reassured me that I was on the right path, and citizenship judge will also ask those kind of questions. So I had quite a bit good endorsement from the people and so forth, and finally was changed in 1994, and over the last 28 years or so, 6 million Canadians have benefited with this. And the same thing was this was way before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendation number 93, which says the same thing and so forth. So there's a lot more work needs to be done. Okay. 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 I will be talking about the program called the Visiting Lectureship on Indigenous Health. And that's I call it fighting the unconscious bias. And what was happening that I was back in 80s, mid 80s onwards, people got to know me that I work with indigenous population, I do some research and so forth. And if you needed lecture on indigenous health, they came to me. So almost a faculty of social work, medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, nursing, and also sociology and anthropology invited me in the classes to give a lecture 1 or 2 hours. So every time I went on the podium there, I would say to the guy, and you know, IOPT classes, minimum 100, maximum 200. And on those, all students were, and I would go and tell them that this is the first and last time you'll see me. Okay. I want you to be very honest on the question that I'm going to ask you. And I'm going to turn my back, so there's no reprisal, so don't worry about that. And I was going to write down things, what they say. And I said, I want you to say the adjective comes to your mind when you think of indigenous people. Okay. And I'll turn around and write 10 adjectives on the board. And then I would turn around back and say, now I want you to do similar things for any single racial group. It might be German, English, Japanese, or so forth. And I'll write down 10 things. And then I'll turn around the class and say, how many of you know any indigenous person? And hardly 10 hands would go up in the class of 100, 200, or so forth. The next question I always ask is that how many of you had lunch with them? Now, to me, having a lunch with anybody, it brings familiarity. Only 3 or 4 hands would go up. And I say, how many of you have been to their homes ever? And that would be 0. Okay? And these were university graduates. And then I'll turn to the board and I think, you have a lot of opinion about these people. And 80% of them were stereotypic negative. Okay? Compared to other group, which is 80% of stereotypic positive. Very interesting dynamic there. And I said, where do you get this opinion? Because you say you don't know them, you haven't been lunch, you've never been to their home. Well, where does this come from? And they would say, media, newspaper. And I said, baloney. What is the purpose of higher education? To me, it's critical thinking for yourself. And I knew my students were not racist, all of them. And they were ignorant. They had unconscious bias. Okay. And I realized that we needed to bring indigenous people on the campus and let them tell their story rather than pseudo expert like Dr. Shah, who had learned on his way, but no experience, no lived experiences. Okay, so then I developed a program called the Visiting Lectureship on Native Health. This was a time in 1988 when I was starting and you needed some money. My department says, we don't have money. My faculty says, we don't have money. I did not know what to do. So anyhow, and it was 88 and I said I needed $25,000 for 5 years, at least to get started with. And so I wrote to a number of foundations. And in retrospect, now I know the new terminology called crowdfunding. And what I did to foundations that I need 25,000, I'll take only 5,000 from you. Only if I get 25,000 from other altogether. So they were reassured that Shah wasn't going to start one over my 5,000 and so forth. And so and my colleagues were doubting me at that time because it was a recession. And I, like a little engine, chuck, chuck, chuck. I shall, and I moved, and I got $25,000. The second hurdle, I started the advertising this, and I get a phone call from the provost office and say, you can't do this program. And I say, why? And he says, oh, it needs approval from the Academic Affairs Committee. And you haven't presented your. And for that, you have to first to go to Faculty Council, your own Faculty of Medicine, and then go to academic board and so forth. And they absolutely, I was stuck in my tracks, really. I did not. Fortunately, what happened that in May of that year, 1990, sorry, I was invited by Mr. Bob Ray. He was an NDP leader. And he invited me to his office. His one office called me and said, Mr. Ray would like to see. And so I went there, and he kind of said he's writing a lot of position papers on different aspects of vulnerable population. He was interested in indigenous, poor, this, that, and so forth. And I had similar interests. He knew about me. So he asked me whether would I be willing to review his paper. He wanted second eyes, academic eyes, and so forth. I said, I'll be more than happy, Mr. Ray. And little he knew, or I knew, that the election was going to be called after my visit. So in June, this was in May, in June, the election was called. Okay. And he became the premier. Okay. So I called up his, once I started planning of my program, in July or so, I phoned up his office and I said, listen, are we still friends? And he says, yes, Dr. Shah, what do you want? And I said, all I want is to come for inauguration of this program. Because Bob had already was also had written most wonderful paper on first ones to come and last one to serve about the indigenous people in Canada. And so he was all for it. And he said, I will come. And so I called up the provost office now. And I say, Mr. Ray is coming. Do you want me to cancel this program? And suddenly it was 180-degree turn. And he says, who told you, Dr. Shah? And because this is a lectureship and not a professorship. So you don't need a blessing from the Academic Affairs Council. And almost all of them, by the way, lined up when Mr. Ray came for inauguration, provost, and we're all on Medical Sciences Building, that's the auditorium we had. And they lined up there. And funny enough, Mr. Ray came from the back door. He just walked, people were expecting his limousine and all that things. It was a funny thing. Anyhow, I won't go in it. And we also developed the logo at that time. And I think it's that logo should.
Yeah, but don't use that. Go this way.
Yeah.
Use these keys.
Okay, sorry. And we developed the logo, and the logo coming from health, it's a circular pattern. This is like a medicine bell, holistic health. And the feather represents 4 races that are moving in harmony. And it's the indigenous person who is giving something to non-indigenous person. And that's a knowledge about them, about their lived experiences, what they want, what are their aspirations, and so forth. And so I wanted, in this lectureship, was a 3-week program. And we took a topic, like, for example, mental health or family violence. So what were the families like before the settler came? What was the present situation? And what was the family like settler came, and what impact our policy had? What are and the second week would always deal with what's the present situation. And in the third week, we always would go and look what are some of the future solutions, and they're suggested by indigenous people. Always no known indigenous person was allowed to speak in this program. Okay, so and they would be the speakers. We will invite them and so forth, and they would, and I would well advertise and tell all the professors in all the faculties and across the universities and say, you can invite only with one condition. There's no charge, no nothing or so forth. And one condition, and that it has to be part of the classroom session and has to be examination question. You know, as a professor, I'm stuck. Okay. I was stuck, that tail wagging the dog, I knew well. So so that way, and then I spread my wing to Ryerson, Metropolitan University now, and also York University, and I got connections there. And then I went to McMaster, and then I also, during that period, I also made sure that the hospitals needed continuing education. So originally we had those teaching hospitals here organizing the program, 1-2-hour program, and then also the community hospitals, we started moving in Scarborough and so forth to giving the lecture. Then also we would have 2 public fora. One public fora will be at the university in the first week and on the first or second days, and we will invite not only that speaker, but also a very prominent Indigenous person, like Phil Fontaine or Ovid McCready or so forth. And vividly, when we were doing on family violence, I still remember Ovid McCready came out publicly and had said that just about a year ago or so earlier. This was back in 92 or 94, I don't exactly remember the date, but he kind of told how he was sexually abused. And in the audience was very interesting, we had 150 people or so. With this, a black man was sitting. He was a tall, stalwart man, and tears were rolling down his eyes. I could never forget that. Okay, so they had a tremendous impact on people because they were talking about their lived experiences. Wasn't some theoretical conceptual framework and all these things and so forth. They were hearing theoretical concepts and so the real life situation. So this is what we did, and we also would have a dinner. I wanted to soften up all the deans, so I invited a lot of deans for one evening dinner with speaker and so forth. And so we had a good way. And also, the mayor's office was always great to me. And mayor office, we will have public fora and city hall, well advertised and so forth. And mayor always through the reception, wonderful reception. Okay. So this is the kind of things we did. I did for different areas and for 11 years and so forth. And these were different lectures on different groups, family violence, the life in urban Aboriginal people, what's happening there, substance abuse, mental health, women's health, and so forth. And also, I realized at the end, almost I was realizing that most of the emphasis we had put was on the First Nations, because that's what my experience was most probably, and subconsciously that was my bias, unconscious bias really. And then I realized that I left out the Inuit and Métis. So in the last 2 years of my organization, we also invited the whole sessions on Métis and Inuit people really, and they're coming in speaking really. And you know, we evaluated the program. It was very well received by everybody, including the speakers. And this is one of the speaker who was also a part of the Royal Commissions. She was, I think, the research director, Madeline Dion South. She's still living in Victoria now, retired, and so forth. And this is what she had to say. And most of people, this is the kind of testimony we got from most of the Indigenous population who were the speakers. Students were ecstatic, and they will, even though we give them 2-hour lecture, and we were the length of the lecture, and it was very interesting. Most of them said it was too short, 2 hours. And I said, they used to kick me out in 1 hour when I lectured, and they must be wonderful. Like Michael Hutchin, I still remember Dr. Hutchin, he was a wonderful teacher. And people would just lap it up, and that's what these people were. Okay, what was the outcome? the outcome of this program was also after 11 years, I was retiring in 2001. And I had in 1999, dealing with the provost, etc., vice provost, etc. at that time. And I had to get to his office for, I was in trouble with another situation on looking at the visible minority in the University of Toronto. And I was Peter Russell was fighting on one side for individual, and I was fighting for the group for representation of visible minority in the faculty. So that landed me into the provost's office, and we had some nice, interesting talk. I'm not going to go on that, but for the last 10 minutes, when it was 10 minutes was left, I said, can we change the subject? And he says, yes, Dr. Shah. And he knew me. Most of people in the upper level knew me as a person working with Indigenous people, not the diversity, equity, and inclusion on the other side. Okay? So he says, what is it? I say, I've got $500,000 in my trust account. And would you match it? Because one of my dreams has been always to have an endowed Indigenous professorship. And he thought it was a win-win for everybody. So he kind of said yes. Right away he said yes. I was just surprised, really. All I had was $400,000 at that time. I bluffed my card, really. And I was fortunate to get another $100,000 from the government of Ontario because I had a good relationship with civil servants, and minister came one of the inauguration things, and she brought the check for $100,000 and presented it to us. And yeah, so I go back, and I was very late. And what happened? I bumped into my chair and the dean together in the foyer of medical science building, and I was so proudly saying my accomplishment. And Dean Neller, we knew each other well, and he says, "You're stupid." And I said, "What?" And he says, "You should have asked $1 million. We could have ended our chair." And David and we were good friends. So he was kind of, even though he said stupid and so forth, didn't mean that way. And I knew. So I kind of said David, hold back. I am visible minority, first generation Canadian. I don't speak good English. And I don't have social connection like you have. So if you can help me to raise another $500,000, I'm ready to go to provost. And he says, yes, I will. And he did. And we got $2 million, and we developed the first of its kind endowed chair in Indigenous health and so forth. And also appointed first Indigenous professor who happened to be our alumni. And so wonderful work out. Also, when Dalla School got $10 million from the Michael Dan, Dan family foundation. That building is pharmacy building, if some of you know. And Michael Dan, I didn't realize, was my student way back, early late 80s or 90s, somewhere around there. And he said publicly, come out in one of the forum like this, and he said, Dr. Shah implanted seeds in me about Indigenous health. And that really stuck with me from his lecture. And I was really pleased to hear, when your student says you have impacted, there is nothing, it's like $1 million to professors winning the lottery. Okay. Anyhow, so he did develop we have a nice Indigenous thing. And also I used to send this lecturer to the chiropractic college and naturopathic. Had a good relationship with them too. And so they established also some Indigenous scholarship for Indigenous students, 2 at the chiropractic college and 4 at the naturopathic college. So that was a good outcome of this thing. Okay, let's see, how am I doing? 5 minutes only?
Yep.
Okay. The next initiative, I got involved with the health sciences student, because after my retirement, I used to get phone calls and say that could you come and lecture? And I realized that there was absolutely, I did some environmental scan, which kind of showed that, oh my gosh, I see pressed that one anyhow. So
You want to go backwards?
no, that's next one. That's okay. That's it. And no, just a minute.
You want to go back more?
Okay. I did some environmental scan and found out that about 47,000 students are involved in health sciences program across the Ontario University and colleges in different, physio, OT, assistant, this, that, and so forth. So, and I was really, and there was no much teaching on that. So we were able to, and they needed some cultural safety training on that area. And this word was buzzing, a new one for me, cultural safety. I did not know what cultural safety was because the way it was written up initially was much more sociological jargon, and me being a simple physician, I don't understand power imbalance and all these things and so forth. But eventually I figured out, and one of my clients taught me what cultural safety was. And one of my clients came to the clinic at Anishnawbe Health. He was about 55 and first visit, Mohawk man and unemployed. And I discovered diabetes on him. He came for minor illness. I discovered diabetes. And I gave him medication and some blood tests and say, come back in 2 weeks. Fellow didn't come back till 5 months. And so when he came back, what does, I was upset subconsciously, I'm sure I was. And what does the professor do? He lectured people. So I started lecturing him how important it was for him to come back and all this blah, blah, blah. And he was smarter than me. And he said, stop that, Shah, after 2 minutes. And he pulls out his wallet and brings out a piece of paper and says, I want you to read it. And that was his welfare slip, which said he was getting $525, of which $325 were taken away for his rent. So he was left with $200. And $200 a month, which is about $7 a day. He had to eat, if he had phone or something, or clothes and this and that and so forth, everything was $7. And suddenly occurred to me, it jolted me, and I said, I'm in this business till I don't understand. I didn't understand it. And so I kind of realized that I need to walk in their shoes to create that empathy. Okay. And that's where we ended up having a program on cultural safety. We trained 25 Indigenous people. Again, I didn't want it through experts like Shah going and lecturing and so forth. 25 Indigenous expert, 10 ordinary people. We developed the curricula with the Indigenous people. Professor developed, 3 of them worked and developed the curricula, and we wrote to all the colleges and universities saying, these people are available free, and each one of them were like, if there was in Thunder Bay College, there was somebody in Thunder Bay, somebody in Sudbury, somebody in Suluk, Sault Ste. Marie, Niagara Falls, and so forth. And we trained 25 Indigenous preceptors as well. And it really went extremely well. We got some grant from the Trillium Foundation, and it was a demonstration project. And at the end, we did transfer the whole program to the Indigenous educational circle, really. So that was again, and there's a lot of now cultural safety program, and the best one is from BC on internet you can do, and great programs for a lot of things and so forth. And this was one of the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as well, that health professionals should be done. And the last in 3 minutes, is that okay? I'm okay, okay. But also, most of you witnessed, heard about it, not witnessed, but heard about the Mr. Sinclair in Winnipeg about 7-8 years ago. He was in hospital emergency room, and he sat there and he died in the emergency room. And there was a lot of inquiry. He had diabetes and he was in wheelchair, and nobody paid attention to him. And that was it. And recently in Quebec, 2-3 years ago, one of the Indigenous person was in hospitals, and she was fortunately, unfortunately, means the people were neglecting him, unfortunately, her, and they didn't take her seriously for her illness. And so she had her phone open before she died, and she was screaming and for help and so forth. And it has become part of the Quebec present election issue too, because Premier Legault came in, apologized. Initially he didn't, but finally he did come out and apologize for what was happening. So the healthcare system is racist. Excuse me, and I will say that because I had a client coming to my office, and I had beautiful one guy, just heart-wrenching stories, what happened to her. The other one woman was with stroke here in Toronto, with stroke, and went to 3 hospitals before she was taken seriously. So there are heart-wrenching stories. There is and so we needed something to be done in this area. And what happened? We needed some policies and programs and so forth. And what also happened to me in my clinic, that I was invited by, this was at the Anishnawbe Health. I used to look after the Indigenous patient, and when they died, 2 or 3 people invited me to their funeral. Okay, this never happens, doctor. You know, it never happens. I mean, I can tell you, I could survey, and I would say probably 99.99% never happened to any doctor. And I was really taken back. And this happened 2 or 3 times. I would go and talk and so forth. But that also kind of, I said, these guys are dying too young. You see, in Toronto, you don't expect people to die young with certain situations and stuff, because we had a plethora of services. Okay, so I asked my secretary, can you look up, can we pull out all the deaths within last 2 years or 3 years? And all I looked at is the average age of death. And then I also was not happy with our small sample. We had about 43 deaths or so. I asked other Aboriginal organizations if they knew anybody, and can you just send me? All I need is the date of birth, sex, and date of death. I wasn't asking any more details. And lo and behold, we had 110 in our sample. And average age of death was 37 compared to 74 for Toronto, because I called up the Toronto Public Health Department. Most of them, people working there were my students, so they're always happy to help the old professor, you know. So that was anyhow. And what we did really in that sense is that and I knew the causes of death in my mind always for anybody, anything and so forth. So I didn't want it to do usual looking at the cause of death. So I wanted to look at what we call the root cause analysis. What really, or social autopsy, why these people died young. I'm sure they had an aspiration, they had their dreams, they had things in their lives. So we interviewed about 20 of their very close family members or the friend, and keep probing him and say, what happened? What happened? What happened? What was this man like? What was this? What are these things happening? And so forth. And out of that, we had some wonderful quotes and so forth. We have published there. It's on the city, Toronto City Public Health Department's website as well. And what we found is really, we kind of restructured it. The whole the conundrum of this whole, how the death happened. And this is what we came out with the root cause analysis. And that is when you look at what I would call, and I call it a delayed tsunami. I call it delayed tsunami because tsunami hits right away and makes the destruction. What we did through our policy took a long time. However, what we are seeing today is the massive effect on Indigenous population because they lost their culture, they lost the languages, they lost the livelihood, and there was intergeneration. We created the through the residential school, a lot of intergenerational trauma, 60 school where we took out the kids and put in child welfare, which still 30% of the children in child welfare are Indigenous children till today, and so forth. And these slowly culminated into those early deaths. So that's what they did. And I've been pushing to the city council for the city of public health, for last 10, 15 years before this. And I said, we have to have some policy because 60% of the Indigenous people are now living in urban centers and we don't have any policies and so forth. And so I went and presented my finding to the Toronto Public Health, and I thought, usually I've got gut instinct that when I do some of this kind of work, it will catch the media. Nothing happened. So, and then I went to and presented to city as a Aboriginal or Indigenous committee, and Mike Layton was the chair, and I presented there. Nothing happened. I thought somebody would catch, some media would catch. And then, lo and behold, in 3 months down the road, the CTV, one of the fellow called Chutney or something, anyhow, I forget the name, but he discovered this on city thing. And he wrote, and he sent a article and wrote, instead of average age of death, he misconstrued. And he says life expectancy in Indigenous people is 37. And lo and behold, suddenly everybody paid attention. And it was in front page in Toronto Star, front page in Metro News. I got a call from the reporter, who is now the NDP leader in Manitoba, Mr. Kanu, and also I got an interview with CBC on national and all this kind of things and so forth. And I had to correct. I say it's not life expectancy; it's average age of death. But that's what I was trying to kind of generate some conversation and so forth, and it did. I also went and presented to local health integrity network, and the chair happened to be also my ex-student, and the MOH was also my ex-student, so it helps a little bit too. And finally we got pushed through, and there was a tripartite committee which kind of came out, which head would be always with the Indigenous people and city health department and the LIN. They worked together and they came out with the finally a policy, first of its kind again in Toronto and so forth, 5-year strategic direction for the Indigenous people in urban setting. And just let me, and this is again in dealing, again, we're talking about Reconciliation Commission, and this was the 22nd recommendation of these people. Now I'm going to go all the way and just say thank you. What my really talk here was, what I'm trying to say really, is that it's not ideas are a dime a dozen. A lot of people see the same thing. What I saw. Okay? What we need to do, if we really believe in reconciliation and so forth, then and that's what the Justice Sinclair had said, that reconciliation is not Indigenous issue, because we have done that. So it is us. It's us. We have to now start moving, and each individual of us have something to contribute to. And contribution would come like as a professor, I had a toolbox. My toolbox consists of teaching, research, and also one of the things which I didn't realize till many years in my career is that I had a voice which was authoritarian voice, because when we professors speak, if you look at all the media, most of the time who gets the kind of interviewed for some facts and some things and so forth, it's us professor. So we have that social responsibility as well. Okay, and so I use my toolbox. Each one of us speak different groups outside and so forth, have different tools. Somebody only have money, you can donate, for example. Okay, somebody has a body to work, you can do the volunteer work or so forth. But each one of us shouldn't feel that somebody else will do. Okay? It's our own responsibility. And thank you.